because revenge sits in my soul, okay? Right? Don't you rejoice over me. I'm going to get back up, okay? And I'm not sitting in darkness. Light's coming.
Welcome to Tearing Up My Heart, Emotional Leadership Lessons, the podcast where we explore the connection between emotions and leadership. In each episode, we will dive into a specific core emotion in an unrehearsed interview of selective high-level leaders. Join me, Jenna Heath, as we navigate the roller coaster of emotions that come with leadership and discover valuable insights that will empower you to become a more emotionally aware and impactful leader. From personal anecdotes to expert interviews, this podcast is your guide to mastering the delicate dance between the heart and the mind. Get ready to tear up old notions and pave the way for a new era of compassionate and effective leadership. Let the journey begin. It's so official. All right, everyone, welcome back to Tearing Up My Heart. I am so very excited, honored, thrilled. I could come up with every word under the sun to describe the beautiful, incredible, so glamorously, fabulously Southern Holly Roberts, who is with us today. I am so excited about this conversation because for any of you listening, you have to go on YouTube so you can see her beautiful face, but primarily because when you look at her, she looks like a Disney princess. And the topic we're going to hit today is like a Disney villain. And so I think it's just so fun. It's going to be so fun to see this beautiful blonde babe talk about a Disney villain of an emotion. So thank you for being with us, Holly.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I feel like, first of all, no one come watch this. I think Jenna has given a very kind but very severe oversell, so there's no need to come check me out. But I am very excited to talk about the revenge emotion today and channel some Disney villain energy. I also want to say I am a listener of the podcast and know a lot of your interviewees talk a lot about, how much they love Jenna. And I want to join that herd and say I also love Jenna so much. But I will share for folks who may not know Jenna very well that I have a list of people that if I were in a sinking ship, these are the people that I would want in the ship with me. And Jenna is on that list because Jenna is going to figure it out. That's what Jenna brings to the table. It's just this really strong problem-solving, solution-driven mindset. And I admire that value in you so much, Jenna, and have enjoyed all the opportunities we have had in collaborating with one another over the last several years.
Oh, thank you. That is so sweet. So to our podcast guests, I'm going to give you just a backstory of our relationship because I realize one or both of us might say things through this that people are like, what is this relationship? So Holly and I are both in the same sorority, Gamma Phi Beta, and we went to different undergrad institutions. So we did not go to college together, met after we had graduated when we were both volunteering for the organization at a national level and spent a lot of time together, traveling together in hotel rooms together. And truly there's nothing that bonds women closer than traveling and sleeping in the same room and sharing a bathroom. There's nothing. And so if I refer to Holly as sister at any point in this, that is why. So now you know. But so let's get into the leader that you are, because I truly think back of so many things I've learned from being able to spend time with you. And, when we were working together for Gamma Phi Beta, we got to travel everywhere and speak on stages and just this life that I think some people would be like, that's a dream. And I really learned so much from you of that season of grace and learning to be kind to people and empathetic, but also like really know your values and your strength and what you bring to the table. And I feel like you have always embodied that so well. And every time I'm in truly challenging situations where I was like, I need to show up with grace, but standards, I think of you. Because that's like the image I have of my mind of someone that has so much grace with themselves and others, but also sets a very high bar of standards in their life. And I really do admire that. And I try to be like that. So Okay, let's dig into it. So, currently, you're a vice president of corporate affairs. You have your undergrad degree in public relations from the University of Oklahoma. This is the moment where you would say,
Boomer sooner.
I knew it was coming. And your master's degree in crisis communication from the University of Kentucky. You specialize in reputation management, media relations, issue management, and social media. You also teach at the University of Maryland in oral communication for national security careers, which that sounds about as intense as it is. Um, and then some of my favorite things about you is you love to travel, listening to true crime podcasts, reading scary books that keep you up at night, and you are the best fur mama I have ever met. So, why don't you tell us about how did you get to where you're at in your leadership journey, and what does that look like right now?
Well, I will pause and say that's high praise coming from the best fur mama I know. So I will take that. I will wear that title proudly. I think my leadership journey has started. Well, it started early. And I think when leadership journeys start early, they often, in hindsight, just look like chaos. That's what I think of it. I would say my first leadership opportunity began with being head cheerleader. And in hindsight, I muddled that up in so many ways that I can't even describe it to you. I think the leadership the piece of my leadership journey that I think is most instrumental and that I reflect upon the most is actually sorority related. I was president of our chapter, Gamma Phi Beta chapter at the University of Oklahoma. And it's a large chapter. It was around 250 women. We have a house that sleeps 75. And not only was I unprepared for this position, but we're going to be talking about this emotion today. I am also sometimes an earrings out, meet me in the parking lot kind of gal, which doesn't always lend itself well to leadership positions. I am often fighting what I really want to say or what I would really like to do and trying to balance that with a more professional or appropriate response. And I did not have the filters at 20 that I do now. And I do reflect upon that there were so many things that now as an adult I'm embarrassed about and things that I look back on, I think, gosh, if I could go back and do that now, because it was big. I was managing a big budget. You're young, so you're managing peers, not even people that you have a lot of experience outside of what they do. There were absolutely women in that sorority who were smarter than me, better leaders than me, and somehow I was the one with the title. And so I think that experience was really instrumental in allowing me to seek out learning opportunities about leadership and to really dive into ways that I could improve and ways that I could get better. Since that experience, I think leadership, I love the way that you described it in a previous issue of this podcast, was that leadership had found you early. You kind of fell into some positions early on. I think I fell into some positions early on as well. I was managing small teams. I always love the people aspect of leadership. I also appreciate your distinction in previous podcasts about management and leadership. These are two different things. And I think the people aspect is always really important to me in leadership roles, including work titles where you are managing other people as well. So now as vice president, I work to manage folks within the company. I'm in charge of culture and employee experience, and I just love that people aspect.
So fun. I love how our generation really has changed a lot when it comes to what most people would call like HR jobs, right? Like, director of people, director of employee relations. And I actually feel like that gets to the heart of what it is, right? Is that I often think that and so funny, you and I were talking about this earlier, but different generations really look at how people interact with their roles differently and what they bring to the table in terms of career and what that looks like. And I think that is something really interesting that our generation has done differently, is that we do show up to work differently, and some of our job titles reflect that. And I'm actually really appreciative of those really small differences.
I agree. Millennials, we're bringing it.
Yes, yes. I've been thinking about this a lot because my oldest nephew is a Gen Z, and then my youngest nephew is an Alpha. And I've been thinking about this a lot, that like I really hope that our generation just makes this world better for them. That's all I hope, is that like we can just leave it a little bit better than we found it in every area that we touch, right? So let's dig into our Disney villain today. I really love that title. We're going to run with that. So, revenge is a pretty dark emotion. I try not to use the word negative and positive, but it is pretty dark. And I think so. I came up with this definition that I hope encompasses every area of it, but it's kind of lengthy, so bear with me. So, revenge is the act of seeking retaliation or retribution against someone who has wronged or harmed you, typically with the intention of causing them pain, suffering, or loss. It often involves a desire to redress a perceived injustice or to restore one's sense of justice. Revenge can take various forms, ranging from physical harm, violence, subtle actions such as sabotage, manipulation, social issues. It is driven by feelings of anger, resentment, desire of vindication, and it can have profound emotional and psychological consequences for both the avenger and the target. What are your immediate thoughts of that?
Yeah, I think that's it. I that is it. I think I want to point out a few things that you mentioned, but I will say, when you had reached out about whether I might be interested in talking and kind of said these are some topics, this one jumped out at me because I've been listening to your podcast, and this is going to be unpopular, and I'm giving that preface. I don't get Brene Brown, okay? It's a lot of feelings. I don't do well with feelings. And so this idea that people are like, oh my gosh, I read this book, and I'm like, the whole thing was about feelings. You read a whole book about your feelings. It's so foreign to me. And listening to some of your other guests, they've given such amazing advice on positivity, optimism, enthusiasm, all of these things. And I thought, gosh, that is just not what I bring to the table. Revenge, that I understand. This is something that is hardwired into my DNA. And when I think about my growth, leadership growth, this is where it's been. I'm still not in touch with my feelings. I am in therapy where we talk about my feelings. This still eludes me, but understanding how to process a perceived injustice, which was part of your definition. And I love that, because one of the questions that I wrote down over here is it about you? And I think so many times it is in fact a perceived injustice. It's a perceived wrong, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes it is that we feel shame, or we feel that our worth is not being recognized. I think there are a number of things that could allow us to feel that someone has wronged us, but sometimes they really didn't. Sometimes it is just happening in your head or in your heart, and there is no need to break out some Taylor Swift, vigilante. I don't know if we cuss on this podcast, so I won't say the second word, but maybe we don't need that song just yet. Maybe this is perceived, and maybe this is happening in our head. So I really loved that about your definition. The next thing that I loved was the way that you ended it, is that this will be complicated for you and for them. And that has been an important thing for me to consider as well. Is this so important to me that I'm about to drag myself through the mud and mire? Because you are. I think that, what is the saying, that the person who seeks revenge should build two graves? You may kill them, but it will kill you as well. And so recognizing, and I'm not here to tell you you should never do it. It's never not worth it. That's not the message that will come out of my mouth today. What I would say is, for me, most of the time it's not. Because when I realize what this will cost me in terms of my own mental wellness, just my time, right? It is often not worth it to get back at someone for something that, again, to my previous point, may or may not have really been about you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that perspective so much, because I think that I mean, I think everyone, right? We all have these crazy leadership stories of situations where you're like, all you want is to like literally take a knife and stab these people. And I'm not a murderer. Please, no one try to say I am. I'm not, I swear. But I think that like that revenge inclination, when whether something actually was wronged or you just feel like something was wronged, that is in our natural human instinct to defend ourselves, right? And so I think about this often. So I'm going to walk you down a story, and then hopefully we'll see how you would handle this situation and we can compare and contrast. So I will not confirm or deny that the story is true, but I have yet to share anything on the podcast that did not actually happen to me, so people can use their best judgment on that one. So in a previous role, a supervisor who was basically misogynistic and just, for lack of better words. And he did a lot of things that were actually wrong. But then he did a lot of things that I would say were perceived wrong, right? So we had a rule that you had to wear a certain type of attire in that role. It was a very professional role. So for women, that most of the time meant old school, I would say, professional attire, high heels, pencil skirts, right? Like pretty intense. And then would also love this idea of walking meetings, and did not have the understanding that a woman doing an hour-long walking meeting in 3 to 6 inch heels is a very different lived experience than a man who is on flat shoes, right? So I'm not here to say that that is actually right or wrong, and whether that is like worth saying that's an HR situation or not. But that happened enough to me that I like really revenge started sitting in my heart, that I was like, what can I possibly do to like throw you over a boat and try to get you to swim while you are wearing bricks? Because that pretty much feels like what you're doing to me. And I never did it. And to this day, I don't have regrets about not doing anything to him, but it still sits in the back of my mind of like, that wasn't right. So what do you think about that entire situation? What do you feel like is the right thought process with revenge in mind?
Send me his address. Let's go teach him a lesson. That's what I think. No, I'm kidding. That's an interesting example, and I first of all will validate. I would have been really annoyed if I had to traipse a man around in my heels that I felt were a required part of my dress code. I would have had some feelings about that. So I think that that's part of my response to this is, what is it that you're actually feeling? And the reason that I ask that, this is, again, as someone who doesn't like feelings, this is what my therapist will ask me. So that it's free therapy for everyone. I'm just relaying it straight from her, because my default setting is to just say, I'm going to get you back for this, without pausing to say, oh, I feel unseen right now, or I feel that I'm being taken advantage of, or I feel, right? Because I think in that scenario, I probably would have said, I feel unseen. You don't recognize what this is doing to my feet, right? The balls of my feet in particular at the end of the day, right? So I feel unseen. And I think sometimes when we identify how we are actually feeling, then our course of action becomes a little more clear. If I'm feeling unseen, I feel like my manager is not appreciating me, or that my manager does not understand a challenge for me, this to me becomes an HR issue, where I either sit, depending on what your organization's HR policies may be, you either sit down with that individual and say, hello, I want to let you know that when you do X, Y, and Z, I feel X, Y, and Z. I wonder if there's a way that we can work this out, or if it is that you go to an HR representative, you don't speak to the manager directly, whatever the case may be. But I think that gives those feelings a place to go, that is not tripping him while he walks, or like planting nails in the sole of his shoes so he feels your pain. Or I think these are things that were spiraling in my mind while you were talking. Oh, you want to know what this is like? I can show you, right? So I think that has been really helpful for me in thinking about revenge, is what is it that I'm actually feeling right now? And if it is that I am actually feeling that you did me dirty, or this is an injustice, you came for me, well, now we're in a different boat. But a lot of times it's that I'm feeling another type of feeling, which when I identify that, lets me know where I should be going. And I think the next thing about that scenario is that the idea of revenge is that you have to stick around to see their demise. Revenge can be, it's a lengthy endeavor. And as someone who has, I mean, people even from college that I am not Facebook friends with, because that's the kind of lengthy endeavor, I am still in with them. All right. It's a long game pursuit on that. But I also think that sometimes you just say, you know what, this environment is not serving me, and I have full autonomy to walk away from it. I think when we commit to revenge and when we commit to making sure that he knows what it's like to walk in these shoes and what it feels like, we're forgetting that at some point we could say, you know what, educating you about what your actions are doing to other people is actually something that I don't have to take on as responsibility. And instead I can find another job or transition to another team or find another option. Just wash your hands of it, walk away.
How do you make that decision? Because I feel like I think back to that particular situation, and I did that. I got a different job. I left. I was like, I'm over you, your behavior, and I walked away. And the person who took my role was living through a very similar experience. And then I started to experience guilt that I was like, oh God, like I was in a position that I could have stopped that from happening. And now this other person is experiencing something very similar. And it started to kind of eat at me. And at some point I had to talk to my therapist and be like, okay, like this is not my fault. It's not my job to protect other people. It's also, and I do think there's a lot of victim blaming around specifically HR issues, that if you're not the one to report something, then it's your fault if someone gets hurt in the future. And can I just say to everyone, that's not true. It is not your fault. Your organization should have structures in place to protect people. And you being the one to out someone, that's not part of it. But yeah, anyway, what do you think about how do people do that? How do they walk away and just say no, this is not my problem. This is not I'm not the answer. And I'm going to take care of myself by leaving this situation.
Well, before I answer that, I will quickly say I agree with you 100% that it's not your responsibility to save the next person. Now, I think an additional thought on that is that as women, we do sometimes naturally worry about the collective group. And I will say I got amazing advice from a mentor in my life. Several years ago, I was considering a few job opportunities, and I was talking to her about these roles, and I said, maybe it's just not a good time because I know the team is really overwhelmed right now, and I know that they need me, and if I leave, we're already underwater. They're going to sink if I walk out. And she said, whoa, would a man think like that? No, she said a man would take the job that's going to pay him more money and give him more responsibility and be something he's excited about, and he's going to tell his team, hey, folks, I know you all are going to land on your feet. You've got this. Let's meet for some beers next week. And I thought, oh, she's so right. I think sometimes a female blessing and curse to be worried about that collective team. And I think to your story as well, if we were to take people out of that context and we were to say, let's say you're walking down the sidewalk and there's a hole in the sidewalk. Sure, it would be great if you turned around and said, hey, everybody, there's a hole here. You let them know. But at the same time, you telling them doesn't change the fact that the hole is the problem. Your manager is the problem. So you alerting people to the problem doesn't change the fact that you aren't the problem. He is the problem. To answer your question, I think one question that I ask myself is, am I still the star of my show? When I reach a point where my thoughts, my energy is becoming so focused on the anxiety that I am feeling from someone else, on this need to show them what I'm made of, or to make them see my way, or to explain the right way to do it, or the right way to think about it, then they are the star of my show. And I very much intend on staying the star of my own show. So that question for me has been helpful in various seasons of my life in saying, oh, I might need to find another opportunity, because at this point, you are becoming so central to my spare time, and even at work related things, when you're preparing for a meeting and you're already trying to think about, well, they'll probably ask this, so I have to think ahead and I have to strategize and I have to do all this. This person has infiltrated your life in a way that is not serving you any longer. I would also say Taylor Swift has a song. Okay, it was a bonus track. When it's time to go, and that song, it's so good. You should give it a listen. I'm a huge Swiftie. We've dropped 2 songs already. I'm sure there's more to come. But I just think sometimes you feel it in your gut when you're like, actually, that's it. It's time to go. And sometimes we rationalize it for longer than we need to, saying, well, but the benefits are good, but this is good, and there's only so long that you can do that when your gut has already told you this environment isn't for you anymore. And while I always recommend finding your next option before you leap, I will also say I have not always done that. There's one work related experience that we do not have to go into, but I absolutely quit. And then I didn't even mean it. I said, I quit. And she said, you quit? And I said, yes, I think I quit. She was like, you think you quit? And I said, nope, I definitely do. I definitely do quit. I was about 25, had no backup plan. The whole thing was terrifying. But it was at that point, I just couldn't keep saying, but this, but this, but this. It was just time to go.
Oh, I love that bravery so much, because I think there is, I mean, I agree with you, right? Like, as a certified career coach, I would tell anyone, like, yes, have your next thing lined up before you dip out, 100%. But this whole other side of me is like, we're humans and we are so freaking complicated. It's unreal. And people that try to just like box in us, our emotions, our jobs, our relationships, it's just not healthy. It really isn't. Like, yeah, if you're in this situation where it is, I don't like the word toxic, but if it's challenging in whatever way, like, you have the power to walk away at any point. And I think if you are ever in a situation or a work environment where you actually feel like you don't have the power, that even more so means you need to walk away. So, something I wanted to ask you, because as you were talking, it kind of got me thinking about, we haven't really on the podcast talked about how leadership is certainly absolutely about leading teams of people, leading projects, leading initiatives, leading organizations. But, early on in the podcast, there were a lot of people that were talking about personal growth and development, right? So it's one bucket. We can put that to the side for a moment. But as you were speaking, I was thinking about how leadership is also about leading yourself and leading your career. And I think that is a very important aspect of revenge, actually, is that, like, to your point, like, if you are the star of your show, then you should be leading your career in your next steps. And I could totally see how, like, if you are so like entrenched in a revenge plot of our Disney movie, then you might not be actively leading yourself to the next right step. So, and I think I know your answer to this one already, but do you think is a right or a wrong way to handle that emotional feeling of wanting to seek revenge while you are trying to think about your next steps and moving towards your future and maybe trying to make healthier choices moving forward?
I think a lot of thoughts on that. I actually had someone share with me a few weeks back the concept of T-pits, which is the pay is the same. So you will continue to get paid whether you are spiraling and you are focused on the downfall of your colleague who keeps throwing you under the bus, or whatever the case may be. You are going to get paid the same if you just show up and you say, excellent suggestion. I don't think we can implement that right now based on our budget, but good thinking. You're going to get paid the same amount if you take that approach to this individual, Or if you say, per my previous email, if you had been paying attention, you would have seen that I released our budget numbers, and had you been able to do math, you would see we do not have a budget for it, right? Which is my default setting when I feel wronged. That's where I want to go. The pay is the same. You're not getting any extra money to lose your mind a little and let your soul sort of speak the real language that you want to speak. I would also say, actually, going back to what you were talking about, some of your previous episodes talking about leadership, professional development and leadership, I would encourage anyone who does not know their Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinder, Enneagram, Emergenetics is a new one I just did, to take the time and do those assessments, because that has been so powerful for me in understanding that the way that I process information, and understanding the fact that while that comment may have been off the cuff to you, because of the way that I am hardwired, I am perceiving that in some way. And this gives me the locus of control. I understand myself. I understand the way my head works. I understand the way my heart works. I understand what I want, where I want to go. And so this means that I am back to being in control, because I know myself very well. And it does not mean that there are not times where I'm like, oh, I'm going to take you down personally. I myself will take you down. It's not that those moments aren't there, but it does mean that I'm in the driver's seat when those moments come about. I have full autonomy to say, here's what you said, and because of the way I am, I process it this way, and because of the way I am, here's what we're going to do about that.
Oh,
so I think, those two responses kind of come to mind.
Yeah. Well, and I love this idea of control, right? Because I'm a recovering control freak. That's why I love that. But I also feel like it goes hand in hand that, okay, so the same thing is that revenge to me is an act of control. Is that something happened to you that you feel wronged by, whether right or wrong, that's not our decision at this moment, but so you feel wronged by, and in an attempt to control the situation, you are going to seek revenge on the person that wronged you. And I think for sure, does that feel like you have more sense of control of the situation? Absolutely. But could you also feel in control by saying, like, I love that T-Pits. I'm going with that. The pay is the same. I love that. I also feel like when you said that, I said T-Pain, and I was like, oh, T-Pain should totally have a song about T-Pits. I love it. We should let him know that he needs to do that.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, we're making a lot of musical reference on this, which really tracks with who you are as a human being, because I feel like you break into song often. Anyway,
it's those are where all my feelings are. It's just song lyrics. I can't process them on my own, so I just need someone else to sing about it, and then I can say, oh, that was it right there.
It's the same. People wonder, Rob made me this shirt recently that said, I like my music so loud because I can't hear my thoughts. And I was like, I've never heard of something that represents my life so deeply.
That's it.
I'm sure my therapist would have concerns about that, but it is true. Anyway, I really feel like that idea of seeking revenge could be this idea of us trying to control the narrative of our story.
Yes, 1,000%. And now I will pass along straight from my therapist's mouth to your ears the fact that you cannot control the thoughts, feelings, or actions of other people. And here's, in the context of revenge, here's what I've learned about that, is that even if I take you down, if you're listening, I did put air quotes on that, take you down. Even if I do that, you still might not think that I'm worthy. You still might not think that I'm good enough for the role that I got. You still might sabotage me in our next corporate meeting, because I cannot control the thoughts, feelings, and actions of other people. So when we think about the concept of revenge, your goal for that revenge cannot be to control them. The goal of that revenge still has to be about you. right? Because you can only control your own thoughts, feelings, and actions. So again, I'm not on here to tell you that sometimes you don't need to take a little revenge. It's not in my blood. But I would say if that revenge has to serve you in some way. And I think a lot of times we find ourselves on a path where we are trying to convince someone else, persuade someone else. And this is, for my fellow Enneagram 3s, we believe it is our genetic right to convince other people. And I think, oh, okay, so that argument didn't work. So you probably need statistics. That's what you would need. Let me find the statistics. The numbers would help you understand. Oh, that wouldn't work. A personal story. That's what you need. Let me find a personal story that would illustrate this better. I just think I haven't figured out the right way to convince you that you're wrong. And in reality, I can't do that. I mean, you can never control the thoughts, feelings, or actions of other people. And I think to your point, realizing that the control is in your own thoughts, feelings, and actions and not theirs can be frustrating but freeing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of freedom of us, people, thoughts, emotions, feelings, all of it. I think that, especially folks that are living in the United States, we often talk about this idea of freedom because we live in one of the freest countries in the world. But like, people forget that also means you have freedom of thought and freedom of choice and freedom of, well, some autonomy, not as much if you're a woman currently, but sorry for those listeners that disagree with me, but it's true. And I think that reminding us that we do have freedom of choice is so important. So I want to kind of flip this a little bit because I thought of a question as you were talking that weirdly has to do with freedom, mostly because you live in Washington, D.C. And so, you've had some really interesting jobs where you've done crisis communication for some really interesting people and places. And we're not going to dig into all those things. But I feel like you might have seen a lot of things that you had to fix in crisis communication because people were acting in revenge. So in those situations, one, I would assume that might have been kind of frustrating in your job that you're like, you really did this and now I have to fix it because you did this stupid thing because you're seeking revenge on this thing. Like, oh my God. But also, what would you tell leaders in those situations, knowing kind of the repercussions that right? Like in the crisis communication, in all the stuff that you're trying to fix, like what would you tell those leaders to be like, hey, here are some things you should think about before you make this potentially really stupid choice?
Well, I will affirm that a career where you often are cleaning up somebody else's mess it's an interesting career path that I have found myself in. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is if you are about to take on this revenge path, you absolutely feel that you need to retweet this person with your own commentary or that we should pull funding from this really noteworthy endeavor that's happening. You think you should do that. I think what's really critical is that for an organization, I'm going to spin this to an individual in a moment, but for an organization, your CSR, your corporate social responsibility, and your reputation within your communities, with your stakeholders, better be so rock solid that they will see this action and they're still willing to follow you, to listen to you, to purchase your products if that's what we're doing. Because if you are going to take every opportunity for revenge on every single person that is wronging you in some perceived or otherwise, your reputation will be one that is combative, that is uncollaborative, that is oftentimes even your brand is lost. It's murky because you're just, we can tell what you're against and we can't tell what you're for. And so when you have an organization, or let's switch to an individual, when we have an individual who is so clear about the things they care about and has demonstrated their values time and time again, and their stakeholders feel that they understand at the core who this person is, if they want to go down a path of revenge, they want to retweet and come for somebody's throat, or they want to pull funding, or whatever the case may be, their audience is probably going to say, okay, well, they must have had a really good reason, or they must feel really passionately about this, and they're still going to be with you. So I think if revenge is a default setting and you're allowing yourself to go down every path where you are mad or you are frustrated, the seriousness of your revenge will be lost, because people won't know what you're for. They will only know what you're against.
That was such an incredible answer to that question. I realized after I asked the question, I was like, this might have been a really, really hard question. But it kind of, and I've always felt this way about you. Like I said at the beginning, I feel like you have such a strong set of standards in your life. And I would also maybe use the word values. Like, I think you really firmly know like who you are, what you believe in, what you care about. And every time I'm around you, it reminds me of what I value and the things that I care about. And it really kind of reminds me like, hey, am I actually living in alignment of the things that I say I care about the way that Holly does? Because I think you do an excellent job at that. And that's probably why you're also really, really good at your job, because it's probably easy for you to help people to see like, hey, like this is in disalignment. Like you say you care about this, but you're doing this. Like, can we figure that out? But I wanted to ask you, like, because I think I hear this a lot from folks, is that values aren't really taught in our culture anymore. It's not something that people often talk about, except really outside of organizational workplaces, right? And really those values are just slapped on a wall and most employees don't know them anyway. But when it comes to personal values, like how do you go about creating those? Because I think this probably does tie into revenge, that if you know what you value and what matters to you, you know what's worth fighting for.
I think, and I know you've had other folks on your podcast talk about having a really strong faith, and I do think that is an anchor for me in terms of how we treat other people, what we care about, the causes that we should be giving our time and our finances to. What's interesting about that is I think, a lot of people who talk about their faith as their core value might cite different scriptures to you as their favorite Bible verse. I'm going to tell you mine, Jenna. It's Micah 7:8, and it's, "Do not rejoice over me, my enemy, for when I fall, I will arise, and when I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me." That's been my favorite Bible verse since I was like 14, all right? Because revenge sits in my soul, okay? Right? Don't you rejoice over me. I'm going to get back up, okay? And I'm not sitting in darkness. Light's coming. All right. There is something I think within me that gravitates towards. This will sound negative, almost a righteous indignation. And I think that phrasing could be dangerous in today's political setting. And so I want to be really clear about that. That when I talk about righteous indignation, I think it is the value of saying, I know what I know, and I'm right when I'm right, and you're not going to convince me that you are right. And sometimes that means we just need to not be friends, or we need to talk about something else, or I need to find another job. I need to walk away, because I think that my values at this point are so concrete that I'm not in a position where I'm here to negotiate them with you. I am not here to change mine, because I think it stems from just a place of assurance. And within that, I will say that I have noticed changes in my own values. I think you think you may notice, I went to Ukraine last March, and I think that was a really pivotal trip for me, and really igniting this value of compassion, that as I've now outed all of the darkness in my soul, there is some compassion in there. There really is. It's there. And I really think we're seeing that value kind of grow in the way that I am spending my time and spending my resources. But I think for folks who maybe are not quite sure of their values, I teach this when I work with organizations to think about their culture and the kind of culture that they want to have. We start with what we don't want. What are the things that you look at and you think, nope, that one's not for me. Because once we figured out what we don't want, it's actually a little bit easier to think about the opposite of that and think, oh, that is probably actually something that more aligns with my spirit, more aligns with maybe those Enneagram preferences, Myers-Briggs preferences, whatever the case may be.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I actually say that to students often, is that not in termination of values, but I think that actually makes a lot of sense to me. But when it comes to careers, is that you should test things, because I actually feel like every job that I've hated, I've learned a little bit more of what I love and what I want to do and what I'm passionate about. And every time I have a crappy boss, I'm actually full. I'm like, okay, I don't want to be like that. Like, I am not taking that with me. Like, I've said this on the podcast before, but one of my mentors always talks about that. It's like the grocery store method, right? It's like, take what you want, leave what you don't. You don't walk into a grocery store and buy everything. That's stupid. But you go into the grocery store and you buy what you want or what you need, and then you leave. And I feel like that is such a powerful concept that people don't get. So I'm just going to keep saying it until it like lands for people.
What's landed? I've got it. I love it.
Thanks, sister. So, as we wrap up, our last and favorite question, I think that we've talked about so much good stuff today, but I still, at the end of the day, think that revenge could be closely tied to fear. That if you're seeking out revenge in a situation, it might be, not always, but might be because you have deep rooted fear in something, whether what something's going to happen to you or something's going to happen to someone else. And so to this day, I still think fear is probably the most prominent emotions for most human beings. And so I will ask you the same question I ask everyone else. If you had no fear, no anxiety, no hesitation whatsoever, what would you be doing with your life and why?
I have an answer. I'm ready. What I would say before that is I do think, and you've given this distinction, so I'll echo it. There is fear that is fear of you feel unsafe, or there's lingering trauma, right? And I think that fear is different than the fear that we are talking about. But I would say if you're scared of it, there's probably something in there that you want a little bit. And I will often tell my college students at the end of the year, my last slide is unsolicited life advice. And on that slide is, well, one of the things is go Greek. So I always give that unsolicited life advice. But I also will say, if it scares you, you should probably try it, because I think there's something in that. For example, I'm not scared of scuba diving because I don't want to do that. I have no lingering feelings about scuba diving. But when we think about living abroad, right, I do start to think about, oh gosh, well, that would be so hard because of this and this and this. But it's also because you kind of want to do it a little bit. You kind of want to try it. So I do think fear can be a powerful tool for us in thinking about possibilities, maybe things that we have not explored because we thought that we were too scared, but in reality, there's probably something in there that we want. So with that framing, I think if I had no fear, I would go into politics. I think that's what I would do. I I appreciate the jaw drop. I hope I would get your vote, Jenna. There are some issues that
I will be the
feel
campaign manager.
Ooh,
I'm
you
Holly
all
for
heard it
pres.
here.
I'm here. I'm here. Oh my God, I'm so here for this.
I will say, when I was in third grade, I ran for school secretary, and my campaign was, by golly, vote for Holly. So we can bring that back if we need to. We'll brainstorm more.
Campaign manager says we'll think about it. I like where you're going. We'll think about it.
Okay, I appreciate that feedback. No, I think there are some issues, especially in today's society, that I just feel so passionately about. And recognize that living here in DC, you see the tensions full force in the way that things play out in a political environment, but you also see the impact that can be made. And so I think because I care so deeply about some of these issues, it is something that I ponder from time to time.
Well, you have my full support if you decide you're ready. I'll be your West Coast representative. I will get everyone on board. I'm here for this.
Well, thank you. And I now think probably a bad move for my political career announcement to have been tied to a podcast about seeking revenge. So we might have to do some damage control on that.
Well, it's a good thing your background is in crisis communication. We got it.
Good thing. Good thing. We'll get it sorted. Everyone vote for me.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Holly. I appreciate your time. I love you deeply. You have been such a rock in my life over the last 10 years or so, someone I know that I can always go to for sound advice, sound wisdom, and most importantly, love. So I appreciate you. Thank you for being, well, you didn't get to choose to be my sister, but thank you for being my friend and my sister.
Well, right back at you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, and also just love what you're doing here. And I think you're making a big impact, and I'm loving listening to the podcast. And I know that what folks are talking about it's meaningful, it's important, and I appreciate you being our leader on this.
Thank you for joining us today on Tearing Up My Heart Emotional Leadership Lessons podcast. I hope you learned so much and are ready to tear up old notions and get started on your leadership journey. Make sure to follow us at J. Heath Moreno, and I hope you'll join us next time.